Today, I want to tell you the story of a device so small, so simple looking, that it quietly rewired the entire planet. Not a rocket, not a giant telescope, not even a nuclear reactor. A tiny switch, a tiny amplifier. A tiny piece of genius that turned electricity into a language we could control. And if you're watching this on a phone, on a laptop, on a smart TV, you're literally holding the legacy of this invention in your hands right now. This is the forgotten story of the transistor. Back in the early 20th century, the world ran on bulky glass tubes called vacuum tubes. They were the brains of radios, early computers, radar systems, and long-distance communication. They worked, but they were also a nightmare. They overheated, burned out, broke easily, and they were huge. Imagine building a computer the size of a room. Just to do math, you can now do in your pocket in half a second. So the question started to haunt engineers and physicists. How do we control electricity without using fragile, glowing glass? How do we create a switch that doesn't melt? How do we shrink the brain of a machine? And that question led to one of the most intense scientific battles in modern history. We're in the 1940s now. World War II has pushed electronics forward fast. Radar, communications, detection systems, everything is evolving, and everyone knows the future belongs to whoever can control signals better, faster, and smaller. That's where Bell Labs comes in. Bell Labs wasn't just a workplace, it was like a scientific city. A place where physicists, chemists, mathematicians, and engineers were stacked together with one mission: solve problems that the rest of the world hasn't even fully understood yet. Inside this place, a team forms around a bold dream. Replace the vacuum tube. The key idea was this: if you can control the flow of electrons inside a solid material, like a crystal, you could build a switch without heat, without glass, without the constant failures. The problem was, nature wasn't cooperating. Because electrons in solids don't behave the way you expect them to. They hide, they scatter, they get trapped on surfaces, they refuse to move cleanly. So you needed someone who could understand the invisible rules behind the mess. Enter John Bardeen. Quiet, precise, a deep thinker. Not flashy, not loud. But when he looked at a problem, he didn't just see wires and materials, he saw the physics underneath, the secret behavior of electrons in a crystal lattice. And Bardeen realized something that many others were missing. The surface of the material was the enemy. The surface had states that trapped electrons, like invisible potholes in the road. So even if you applied an electric field, the electrons wouldn't respond the way you wanted. They were stuck, frozen, blocked. Now think about what that means. The whole dream of a solid-state switch was failing, not because the idea was wrong, but because the surface was sabotaging the experiment. That insight changed everything. Then there was Walter Brattain. More hands-on, more experimental. The kind of scientist who could take an idea and wrestle it into reality with patience and stubborn effort. And above them both was William Shockley. Brilliant, ambitious, driven. Shockley wanted a breakthrough so big it would stamp his name into history. And to be fair, it did. But not without tension. Because inside that lab, the air wasn't just filled with calculations. It was filled with pressure. Competing egos. Different visions. And the ticking clock of innovation. By late 1947, Bardeen and Brattain are working closely, trying to create a device that could control current using a solid material, specifically germanium, a semiconductor. A semiconductor is strange. It's not a perfect conductor like copper, and it's not an insulator like rubber. It sits in between, and that in-between is where the magic lives. Because if you can tune it just slightly, you can make it behave like a gate. Open. Close. Amplify. Control. They start experimenting with a tiny piece of germanium, carefully prepared, carefully cleaned, with delicate contacts placed on it. And then It happens. A tiny signal goes in. A larger signal comes out. Amplification. Not from a vacuum tube, from a solid chunk of crystal. It worked. The first transistor had been born. Imagine the feeling in that moment. No fireworks. No dramatic explosion. Just a quiet confirmation that the world is about to change forever. That first device was called a point contact transistor. It wasn't elegant and it wasn't stable enough for mass use yet, but it proved the concept. Electricity could be controlled inside solids. The vacuum tube had a replacement. And history had a new turning point. Now here's the part most people miss. The transistor wasn't just a better switch. It was a doorway. Because once you can make one transistor, you can make many. And once you can make many, you can build circuits that think. And once you can build circuits that think, you can create machines that calculate, communicate, store memory, and process information faster than any human brain can keep up with. The transistor wasn't the digital age. It was the seed of the digital age. It was the first domino. And once it fell, the world couldn't go back. Computers shrank. Radios became portable. Then came integrated circuits. Then microprocessors. Then personal computers. Then the internet. Then smartphones. Then everything. So here's a question I want you to sit with. What invention do you use every day without realizing it's the reason your modern life exists? Because the transistor is one of those invisible kings of history. It doesn't get the same spotlight as rockets or moon landings. But without it, none of those modern systems would even function the way they do. Now, the story also has a human shadow. After the breakthrough, credit became complicated. Shockley, Bardeen, and Brattain would all share the Nobel Prize, but the relationships between them fractured. Shockley went on to develop the junction transistor, a version that became easier to manufacture, and he later became connected to the early story of Silicon Valley. Bardeen, the quiet genius, did something almost unheard of. He won a second Nobel Prize later for a completely different breakthrough in physics. The only person to ever do that in physics. Brattain, the experimental master, remained respected, but less celebrated publicly than the others. And that's often how science goes. Big discoveries are built by teams, but history usually reduces them to one name, which is why we tell these stories. Because behind every world-changing invention, there are people, messy, brilliant, stubborn people, trying to force nature to reveal its secrets. And sometimes, the secret changes the future. So as we close, I want you to look around, at your screen, at your devices, at the invisible world of signals moving through chips, processors, and circuits. All of it traces back to a moment in 1947, when two scientists leaned over a tiny crystal and proved that electrons could be controlled. A small device, a giant consequence. If you enjoyed this episode, drop a comment with the word transistor and tell me what device you think couldn't exist without it. And if you want the next episode in this Forgotten Discovery series, subscribe and stay close, because the next hidden breakthrough might be sitting in your life right now, and you don't even see it. This is Lost Pages of Science. Keep questioning, keep digging, keep finding the pages the world forgot.